Hi, and today let's talk about the D780 and its autofocus. Let me give some background. 3 years ago I shot with the D750, mainly weddings but also families and all the other sort of stuff. One of the most difficult, one of the most essential shots to get as a wedding photographer is the bride walking down the aisle with her father and then walking back up the aisle with her husband. I really couldn't imagine screwing those shots up and having to give photos to the bride and groom that didn't include at least 2 or 3 shots of that I've just explained. So you need to be able to get a shot of a person walking towards you with lots of other people around, and get pretty darn good focus. On the D750 I used to do it with single point autofocus, continuous obviously, move the focus point to where I thought the bride was going to be, hit back button focus as she appeared on her face, and then just keep that spot, over her face as she walked up the aisle. It's limiting in terms of composition. You can't move that spot while she's actually walking towards you. Well, I couldn't anyway. But it did work. I would say probably if I took 10 shots as she walked up the aisle, 8 are going to be good enough to use. 6 or 7 would be absolutely tack sharp. When I moved to Sony, 2 years ago, I obviously had the luxury of eye autofocus and phase detect, which did change things, but it's not perfect. I ended up with the Sony with 2 buttons for focus. One was a normal focus button, and for that shot of the bride walking up the aisle I would have a small square, again position that where I thought she was going to appear, and probably start off using that focus method using one of the back button focuses. As you got closer and I guessed that the phase detect would at this point kick in, I would switch to another button which would activate face and eye AF in the hope that she was close enough, and it would pick up her face and then just track for the rest of the walk up the aisle. It wasn't 100%. There were times when it picked up her dad's face, not her face. There were times when it just didn't do anything and I had to go back to normal focusing with basically a single point. So it's great, but for those really key essential shots, I had to have this little single box and continuous focus in case the phase detect didn't work, because it wasn't absolutely guaranteed. So with the D780, I've done one wedding, but today I've wanted to find out, and I've done the experiment to find out what is going to be the best focus method to use for both the Viewfinder and for LiveView. What is the best way to get this shot in future? I will probably use LiveView because hopefully the phase detect will kick in and IAF will kick in. But if not, then how would I use the Viewfinder? And what are the best focus modes to use to get the best results for a moving subject? So what I've done today is I've gone out in the garden and I've got some shots of cars driving past the house, and I've used the Viewfinder with 3 different focus modes, and I've used LiveView with those same or the equivalent focus modes in LiveView. Let me very quickly give you the bottom line in case you're not wanting to sit around and watch the rest of it, which by the way we'll pop into Lightroom in a second and have a look at the actual photos. But the lowdown: auto area AF in the Viewfinder. I had the thing on fast burst, and it was so the shots were out of focus, 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 out of focus, 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 out of focus. Really not very good at all for auto area. I then went on to 3D tracking through the Viewfinder, And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 shots, everyone perfectly in focus. Some slightly more perfectly than others, but all completely usable. Then switched to what I used to use, or similar to what I used on the D750, D9, so dynamic 9. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 11 shots there, all perfectly in focus. So the viewfinder, it looks like auto area isn't that great, but certainly 3D tracking and dynamic 9, brilliant. Moving on to the live view, what do we got? We got auto area. Similar story really, not brilliant. Out of focus, 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 focus. Sorry, out of focus, 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 out of focus, out of focus, 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 focus. So a bit better actually than the viewfinder. But what I did find, the problem with the live view auto area, first of all, as the car came round the corner here, it would be focusing initially on the closest thing, which was this hedge, and I really couldn't make it not focus on that, not with that composition. So it took probably that first shot that it missed, was because it had to refocus from here over onto the car. It then didn't, as I say, in the middle of the shots, it didn't track very well. Not really sure why. And also the green boxes that light up to say what's in focus, and you normally get 3, 4, 10, whatever ones are being used for focusing. It was going all over the place, and you didn't really know what it was focusing on. Was it focusing on the number plate, on the wing mirror? And I thought it looked like when you looked at the screen that it would jump to the background on some of the shots because you got boxes lighting up here. It didn't actually get as bad as that, but not easy to know, not good to have any confidence about what it's focusing on. Moving on, lock on focus. So this is auto area, where you then press the OK button and that lights up a little white box in the middle. You can then simply put that over the subject, hit back button focus, and you can then, that will then track that all over the screen. 100%, and I think there was about 15 shots there. Then finally, using live view dynamic 9, so again a single point but with some points around the outside, and that wasn't very good. Surprisingly, I thought that would be as good as the viewfinder, but nowhere near. We're out of focus, out of focus, out of focus, 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 out, 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 focus, focus, focus. So a bit hit and miss. So really, it looks like for the viewfinder, for the live view, we're going to be using 3D tracking. It seems to be excellent, in spite of all the videos that I've seen that say it's not as good as the Sony. Certainly from this experience here, and we'll have a look in Lightroom in a minute, I couldn't really ask for anything better. I mean, 100%, you can't get any better than that, can you? Let's take a look at Lightroom. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom looking at the first picture, and basically the first burst of pictures was all these here, and this setting was through the viewfinder in auto area mode. So if we now look, and I was in all the other shots where I had control, I was trying to focus on the number plate, and well, as you can see, we've got no focus here whatsoever. By the way, just out of interest, it was 85 1.4 D lens, shot at 1.4 so that I had as shallow a depth of field as I could get, so I could actually see what was in focus and what wasn't. Also chosen 2.5 thousandths of a second, so that we do pretty much freeze the action. So on to shot number 2, and that's getting there. It's on the way, but it's not what you'd call sharp. It's probably if you weren't going to crop it at all, you could probably use that photo, but it's not hasn't achieved the objective yet. Photo number 3, and that has now got pretty much there. That's rather good. We are focused in at 100%. So from number 3 onwards, we're okay for a few shots. And very shortly we do get to a shot which has gone out of focus. I think it's this one. Yes, it hasn't gone out of focus, but it's not as sharp. In fact, the next one as well, I think. Yeah, that's, again, it's kind of, it's in the ballpark, but if you look, and I do apologise, each picture is taking a few seconds to render, so you've got to give it a moment just to see whether it is perfectly in focus. And you can see that one is definitely sharper than the previous shot. So we're back into focus okay, and nearly finished. And the last 2 shots, well, in fact, sorry, I think the next shot drifts off of focus as well. Now, I've purposely got in a position where I had some grass and undergrowth and stuff in the way, so that in the last couple of shots I could see whether the focus moved from what it should be focusing on to the foreground, and it kind of looks on this last shot like it's completely given up and doesn't know what to focus on. So nothing in focus at all there at all. So then we move on to 3D tracking. And what I did for this, so if we've got the focus area is kind of, you know, this sort of area here, isn't it, through the viewfinder, I positioned initially positioned the focus spot obviously up around this area, and as soon as the car came properly round the corner, hit focus, and instantly we're in focus. And bear in mind just how far away this is. It's probably at this point 20 yards away, 20 metres away, something like that. So certainly not a close-up shot. Next one. Well, in fact, I won't bother going through all these, because I promise you all of the rest of these shots, and there's quite a few, because the car wasn't, and maybe that's, I hope it's not cheating, but I've got more shots of this car than any other car, so it possibly wasn't going quite as fast. But if we just look at 1 or 2 random shots, it's absolutely nailing the focus in every single shot. And if we look at the ones where the foliage starts to get in the way, you can see it's ignoring the foliage and still focusing on the number plate. And the next one, it's got a lot of foliage in the way and we're still in focus. And the final one, I don't think I can even see the number plate. I can, sorry. That really is now very obscured and we're still in focus. So they did an absolutely brilliant job. And finally, through the viewfinder, we're using dynamic 9-point. And again, this was the first shot. As you can see, we're in focus. And again, I won't bother going through every one of those, but it stayed in focus all the way through. And again, even when the foliage was in the way, I can really hardly tell whether that's in focus or not, because it's so obscure. But yes, even that is in focus with all this stuff in the way. So I did a brilliant job. So through the viewfinder, 3D tracking, brilliant, works perfectly. Dynamic 9-point, brilliantly, no problems at all. Auto area, a bit iffy. Okay, so moving now on to live view. And again, we start off with auto area. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I did have to change the speed because the sun had, it wasn't completely out, but it was a lot brighter than it was when I was doing through the viewfinder shots. As you can see, that's definitely not in focus by any stretch of the imagination. By the time we're on the second shot, that's pretty good. Maybe not quite as good as it was through the viewfinder, but it's still perfectly acceptable. and apart from one, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, so it looks like, from my notes, I didn't think this was as sharp. Yeah, bearing in mind this is very shallow depth of field, as we're shooting at 1.4, I kind of thought that actually the person in the car was, and certainly maybe the wing mirror and the steering wheel, were probably just as much in focus as this. So I kind of tend to think that the focus has drifted somewhere in between the two there. And when you compare it to the next shot, hope this is coming out in the video okay, that is a tad sharper. Again, not as sharp, I don't think, as the viewfinder shots were. And if we then go to lock-on tracking with the live view, so what I'm doing here is we've got the square box in the center, and it's a white square box. We're just waiting for something to come along and hit focus. So I put that initially over, the car was obviously a little bit further back, put that initially over the number plate, recomposed just slightly, and took the rest of the shots just holding the back button focus down, and that's fine. Again, I'm still not quite convinced it's as good as the viewfinder. No, it probably is. It probably is. And again, that worked perfectly all the way through. How did it deal with foliage right at the end? It's a bit too far. This one here. Again, number plate. It's ignoring all the stuff in front of the number plate and focusing still on the number plate. By the way, you can adjust the settings for how quickly it will refocus if it sees something in front of what it was originally focused on. My setting is midway. I think there's 5, 1 to 5. 1's fast and 5 is slow, or the other way around. Can't remember without looking. Anyway, it's on 3, so I'm in the middle, and that seems, certainly in this instance, to work perfectly okay. And I have completely lost the car at that one. And finally, we have the D9, the dynamic 9-point equivalent in live view. And I'm sorry, but that isn't bang on in focus. And of course it's really easy, because I positioned the dynamic 9-point, the center point of it here, and just kept it on the number plate all the way through. So it shouldn't, I mean, this, I'm surprised, this should be a really good result, but as you can see, that's way off of focus, as is that one. And it's not until the 4th shot, so we're now talking, what we're talking about 3/4 of a second later, that it finally gets focus on the number plate. So not very impressive. And if we carry on all the way through, there were actually some shots a bit later, see if I can guess which ones they were, that again it went out of focus. And I mean, that's horribly out of focus. That is really quite bad. Again, when you look at the whole picture, it's not that bad, but for this experiment, that just simply isn't good enough. When we get to the foliage shots, sorry, I moved too far. Again, that seems to be ignoring the foliage as well. So it's doing a good job of that, but not such a good job all the way through. So that's D9. So for live view, again, it's the lock-on tracking that seems to work best in both the viewfinder and in live view. So that's answered my question. I hope it's answered your question, if you had any questions. By the way, just a final thing, I did also have the metering, the light metering, set to spot focus. Spot focus? No, sorry, single point exposure. and that's obviously linked to the focus point. And because I wanted to see if the focus point in any of the modes wandered off, whether or not it would change the exposure dramatically. But it really hasn't actually. In fact, let me find, which was that one that was out of focus. So that one's out of focus, and if you just notice the histogram here, okay, and just remember that, and then we'll jump forward a couple of shots to where we have much better focus, and there's really not that much difference in the exposure. I was just wondering if maybe if it jumped off onto the black, how much that was going to affect the exposure, and if it went onto the bang onto the white number plate or onto a reflective surface like this, whether we might get some really crazy exposures. But I had auto ISO on, and every shot pretty much seems to be the same. So linking the exposure point to the focus point really does seem to work well, and that's the way I like to take shots, so that my subject is correctly exposed, and if we've got dark shadows and things like that, well, that's just the shot. So that's my assessment of the D780 focus tracking capabilities. Pretty good, no complaints at all. Hope that's been helpful. Cheers for now.